If I were to ask you today as we begin thinking on this concept of God of entertainment, what was one of the main distractions at your family gathering? If you had one or with some friends, or maybe you went to a restaurant or had folks to your home or you went to someone else's. But probably one of the number one distractions was the area we're talking about today, whether that be sports or some other media or entertainment resource that distracted from meaningful conversation and fellowship together. Someone recently said this: Thanksgiving dinners take 18 hours to prepare. They're consumed in 12 minutes. Half times take 12 minutes, and that's no coincidence that those two things jive. And hopefully you had more than football you enjoyed this past week with your family. But can I just say today as we begin that the thrust of our study is not to talk down entertainment in a sense that misses the heart behind it, but it's just to evaluate where it's gone from just a side part of our lives to where it's become more central, at least enough that it supplants our vibrant relationship with the Lord. A.W. Tozer, in the middle of this last century, wrote a book called The Great God, or an article called The Great God Entertainment. And he said that the more vibrant our inner lives are, the less we need from the outside. That is, the more active we are in mind and spirit, the less we need to fall back on external media and other input. He said, by measure, and this would have been, by the way, in the 1950s, the present inordinate attachment to every form of entertainment is evidence that the inner life of the modern man is in serious decline. And can I just say today, the fact we are so intrigued by such superficial, shallow pursuits at least ought to give us a word of caution that maybe something's a bit hollow inside that we're trying to fill with this concept of entertainment. And we find here in our text this morning the great man Solomon, in fact, the greatest king in Israelite history, reflecting on a decision he made to entertain himself with everything this world had to offer. As a result of it, we see in this journal entry the things he grappled with, the things he learned, and I believe this morning some things that we can take away from in this area of entertainment. Now, the question is, what is wrong with entertainment? We're not against entertainment, but Solomon, I believe, took what should have been a side pursuit, made it the central pursuit, as a result ended with saying it is all vanity and vexation of spirit. The question this morning is, how do we avoid looking to or longing for entertainment in a way that depletes or hinders our worship and passion for God? And that's what we want to emphasize today, and I hope God will speak to your heart as He has mine. Today, may I say that deposing the God of entertainment requires unplugging three idolatrous sources, and that's what we want to talk about today that I believe are given to us through entertainment. First of all, let's talk for a few minutes. Number one, the first thing we have to unplug from is wine-induced entertainment. If you will, go back to our text and look at verses 2 and 3. He says this, verse 2, I said of laughter, it is mad, and of mirth, what doeth it? I sought in my heart to give myself unto wine. I sought in my heart to give myself unto wine. Preacher I was listening to the other day said this, quote, if you're trying to run from God, the devil will give you a ride. If you want to run away from God, he will give you many on-ramps to that accelerated agenda of moving away from God. And can I just say today, one of the fastest on-ramps is in this area that we're starting with today. Wine-induced entertainment. It's connected to a substance that dulls our minds and distracts our hearts, and when it's unchecked by God's truth, goes in a direction that displeases the Lord. All right, let me give you two things he references here, and the message today is not focused primarily in this subject matter, but he begins with this, and I think there's a few takeaways we can have today in reference to entertainment. Jot down these two things that I think accompany wine-induced entertainment. Number one, we need to drain the laughter of wine. Drain out of our lives the laughter that is only produced through alcohol. You ever notice that one of the, and again, I don't want to go to seed on this aspect of our study today, but one of the side effects of alcohol or other substances that dull our minds and our hearts, that it produces a skewed view of what's funny. It produces a skewed view of what truly is humorous. And you will notice that he says this in verse number 2, this proverbist, this great writer and king of Israel, said, I said of laughter, it is mad, and of mirth, what doeth it? And the word mad here carries the idea that when it's chief good, when it is the primary purpose, what normally is harmless now becomes, when it's all about laughter, it now is in a wrong position, it is improper, it is inappropriate, and often that's a part of a wine-induced entertainment. Late night comedy, can I just remind us tonight or this morning on TV or internet browsing, and many times accompanied by a few glasses of this or a couple of cans of this, that we have no business being a part of that as a believer. It is a worship of a lesser God. All right, second look at verse 3. He goes on to say, I sought in my heart to give myself unto wine, yet acquainting my heart with wisdom to lay hold on folly, till I might see what was that good for the sons of men, which they should do under heaven all the days of their life. Number 2, jot this down. We need to drain out the carnality of wine. The laughter that often is a part of wine. Number 2, the carnality that's associated with wine. And the language here in verse 3 where he says, I sought in my heart to give myself unto wine is a very strong graphic picture. He sought literally to find satisfaction in things that only are on the back end of being drunk. And the language here where he says, give myself unto wine, literally means to draw out my flesh. It's the same word used. This same word is used when they would take the captives of a military conquest, and they would literally drag them behind the chariot of the conquering hero. And literally, wine will drag our flesh. It will bring us into carnality and all the things that are associated with it. And so we need to drain that out of our lives, where alcohol and other substances are feeding our flesh and fueling our flesh, where God's Spirit would have us go otherwise. You notice in verse 3, the end of the verse, he says that his resolve is to find everything under the sun and see if there's any good, if there's anything satisfying, and he begins here with his flesh. By the way, he says in verse 3, I sought in my heart to give myself unto wine, yet keep my wisdom. Here's just a thought today, and I know some of you are going to disagree with me on this, and I hope God's Spirit will work in your heart about this, but I can just say this to you. The more wine you have, the less wisdom you have. The more wisdom you have, I've found with the saints that I interact with, the less wine is a part of their day-to-day existence. Those two things are the antithesis of one another. What Solomon is trying to do is have it both ways in verse 3. And some of you may be doing the same thing. Can I encourage you? You're thinking more on a fleshly level. You're not thinking on a spirit level. What would please God? What positions me to be most wise, to be most pleasing and honoring to Him? Now, I mentioned this, and if you want more on this subject, I'll just give this little input. If you'll go back to our series on hot topics, I covered alcohol in that series, and we dug into this at greater length. But I will just say this, for those of you who are thinking, well, wine's no big deal, or some other substance that's a part of my life, I can control it in moderation. One of the things that came out of that study in my own life that God spoke to me on, in the Old Testament times, one of the studies I was reading, one would need to drink 22 glasses of wine in order to consume the amount of alcohol in just 2 martinis of today. The wine he's referencing here is a very diluted wine. It's not even of the strength and import of what we imbibe today. And so Solomon said, I'm going to give myself, and wherever it leads, I'm going to follow this pleasure, this entertainment that's a part of it. Can I just remind you of a few consequences of what wine and alcohol do to our lust? In Genesis 19, it led to incest. In Proverbs 4, it leads to violence. In Proverbs 23, it leads to gluttony. In Lamentations, in Habakkuk, it leads to nakedness. And in Revelation 17, it leads to fornication. All of those are carnal ends of this initial engagement we have with alcohol. My wife likes IKEA. I don't know if any of you like IKEA. A new one just went in Columbus, their Polaris area. But they have going on right now a lawsuit because a lot of their glass furniture is exploding. Have you seen this story? And they just had, again, this last week, another lawsuit leveled against IKEA. A mom was at home, and thankfully her son was not in the bedroom, but they had a glass something in his bedroom, and it literally, she said, sounded like a shotgun. It just blew up, just exploded. Another mom back this past summer in July had her infant next to one of these pieces of furniture, and it just exploded, and glass went all over her young child. Now, can I just say today, you can do whatever you want. But when you head toward entertainment, when you head toward pleasure and you're willing to fuel that with the substance we're talking about today, don't be shocked when it blows up in your face. Don't be shocked when where you thought you were going in a wise manner actually led you in a dangerous direction. I would just ask you this question before we move on. Why would we ever put in our glass something that even socially or just around the holidays transforms the best of person into someone who cannot check their animal-like instincts? We must abstain from it, I believe, for the sake of our families and our witness and testimony for the Lord. Who are you worshiping today? When you worship the one true God, I think you make some judgment calls in this area that are different from the world because you want to please and honor Him. All right, go back to our text, if you will, now in verse number 4. A second area in which we look to the God of entertainment. So wine-induced entertainment. Solomon tasted of it. Solomon drank deeply of it. And in a moment, he'll get back to the aspect of vanity. But look at verse number 4. He says this, I made me great works. I builded houses. I planted vineyards. All right, number 2. So first of all, we have wine-induced entertainment. Number 2, we have work-inspired entertainment. Work-inspired entertainment. And this is where God convicted me, all right? These verses 4 and following. This would be an illustration of where I live, okay? I like to work. I enjoy working. I grew up, on Labor Day, got together with Grandpa, and we worked on the farm. That's just how I was raised. And I have to work to not overwork. But the other day we were flying back from Pensacola, a speaking engagement, and my wife and I are in the plane. It's like 10:30 at night. We're flying from, I think it was Atlanta to Akron, Canton. And I look over, and 3 or 4 grown men. I mean, some of them were even in first class. I was not, but I was looking up, and everybody is on their phone playing games. And one of the games that was being played by several was Candy Crush. Any of you Candy Crush people out there? It drives me crazy, okay? And I'm watching grown men at 10:30 at night, with the cabin lights dim, play for hours playing that game. And I'm sitting there in my criticism of them. And then it struck me, I had just been on my laptop 10 minutes before working at 10:30 at night. They're playing Candy Crush, but I'm working. I think for some of us, where our worship gets off is not in entertainment as maybe first comes to mind, but just we give ourselves to our job. We give ourselves to task. And we see Solomon doing that, driven by work-inspired entertainment. And notice a few areas that he tried that I think we tend to try, and it leads us away from worshiping the one true God. You notice in verses 4 and following, first of all, jot this down, we need to retire from creativity of work, just creating things and trying new things and building new things, all at the expense of our relationship with the Lord. Now, can I just say this? God is a creative God. He's made us to long to be creative, but often what we're taking our ability to do is to fashion our own gods, instead of to build a life, to build a ministry, to build a testimony for His name and for His glory. In verse number 4, you notice that as the richest, most powerful man that had ever lived in Jerusalem, he used that to build things, to build buildings and vineyards, to supply the previous point we just covered. And he built and he built and he built. In fact, in verse 5, he goes on to say, I made me gardens and orchards. I planted trees of all kinds of fruit. Can you visualize Solomon just researching and then planting and providing for these pursuits and this entertainment, being creative, trying new things? By the way, I think what he was really doing was building a paradise. The word that's used there, garden, is the same word, paradise. He was trying to build a paradise without God at the center. And there's some men in the room, you're trying to do the same thing. Some of the ladies in the room, you're trying to build a perfect environment, but it's about the environment, not about the God who alone can create that. And so we would be very careful in this area of creativity, just doing it because it's something creative. Verse 6, he goes on to say he makes pools of waters. This would reference artificial irrigation, and now he's propping up what he has created, these gardens and these trees and these vineyards, supplying for them. Brings to mind Jeremiah 2 and verse 13, where God says this, "For my people have committed 2 evils. They have forsaken the fountain of living water and hewed them out cisterns, broken cisterns that can hold no water." And we've left God, and we're propping up this life we have, and we're still empty, and we're craving, and we're longing, and God says, leave that and come back to me, the source of living waters. May I just say this before we move on? Much of our work and our hobbies are an attempt to find something we can make to worship. We give ourselves to it, we coddle it, we maintain it, we minister to it at the expense of our relationship with the Lord. And here's why I often do it, and probably you do as well. The world is so chaotic, but I can build this and control this, and it's something I can touch, it's something I can manage. Maybe we'd be very careful not to get our entertainment, not to get our joy from the things that we make. All right, then you notice in verse 7, notice he says this, I got me servants, maidens, servants born in my house, and also I had great possessions of great and small cattle above all that were in Jerusalem before me. Number 2, jot this down, retire from the maintenance of work, the creativity of work. Number 2, the maintenance of work. Why did Solomon need servants and butlers and handmaidens to keep going all the things he had started? Who was going to weed the garden? Who was going to tend the trees? Who was going to make sure the water was what it was supposed to be? He had to now maintain the things that he had begun. The things that he had started, he had to now sustain. And this is the sabotaging of God-given work without boundaries. It is a distorted, overwhelming, constant need to maintain your off-time hobbies and pursuits. And you have to constantly be thinking about and focusing upon them. Could it be some of them are an improper distraction? Now, why did he do all of that? You find it in verse 9. He references it again. But did you notice that at the end of verse 7? Above all that were in Jerusalem before me. We're in the day, I don't know if you saw some of your neighbors putting up holiday lights or Christmas lights or whatever, but isn't it amazing how people compete? You know, neighbor does this, and then next year now I'm doing this, and you know, just the bizarre within us that has to keep up with the Joneses. But you see here, Solomon is trying to distance himself from the competition, to distinguish himself as the greatest king that ever lived in Jerusalem. I think some of the men in the room, the reason you're working so hard is not for a God-given reason. Your motivation is a proud one. Your motivation is, again, a work ethic is a good thing, but it's driving you and fueling you to have the best house, the best car, the corner office, the whatever. And it's moving you away from worshiping God to worshiping this lesser God. If you've noticed, nice things not only have to be bought and built, but then they have to be maintained. And one of the things I have found is that the things we claim to own, really many times they own us, don't they? And we spend so much of our energy and time. And one of the things I've encouraged our men as we've been looking at before we bought this building and things I've even done personally is not just think about the initial cost, but what is the maintenance going to be? And being careful not to overextend ourselves in areas that are inappropriate. And so this is a part of those who are work-inspired in their entertainment. You can criticize the couch potato, many of you in the room, but you're just as guilty of this, but you're looking for that amusement, you're looking for that entertainment through your vocation. Now, can I ask you to turn to a quick verse God gave me just the other day that just hit me between the eyes, John 17. Would you go there? As many of you know, I've been working very slowly through the book of John and have enjoyed it instead of knocking out a bunch of chapters. Sometimes I've been spending a whole morning and afternoon off and on just reflecting on one or two verses. John has just been glorious this fall for me, and I'm so grateful for God speaking to me through it. But John 17, I want you to look at verse 3. And the question I would ask you before I read the verse is this: why has God made it that everything we build and everything we make with our own hands, with our own effort, that it always rusts or corrupts? Why did God structure it that way? And why is the only thing that lasts this eternal life that he promises us? Well, look here in John 17 and verse number 3. And I've never seen this before in this prayer of Christ for his followers just before he leaves. But look at verse 3. And this is life eternal, that they might know thee, notice this, the only true God, and Jesus Christ, whom thou hast sent. Now, the language of verse 3 is this. Basically, here's what life eternal is. This is what it's meant to be. And what is life eternal meant to be? It's meant to be a place or an existence in which we know the only true God. The reason the car keeps breaking down, the reason the house keeps needing repairs, the reason that a job, you got to keep your eye on the ball just to keep things going in the right direction, is because God knows those things ultimately don't lead us to him. It is what's eternal, it's what's lasting that causes us to believe him to worship him and to put our faith in Jesus Christ alone. And so the question today is, are you engaged in a work-inspired entertainment? Wine-induced, work-inspired. All right, thirdly, if you will, go back to our text in Ecclesiastes and look at verse number 8. And I love how Solomon is so transparent with us through his journal. I don't know if he knew this would be read by millions and millions of people in the future, but he reflects on his pursuits. And there's a third one he references in verse 8. Notice it. I gather me also silver and gold, peculiar treasures of kings and of provinces. I got me men singers and women singers and the delights of the sons of men as of musical instruments and that of all sorts. All right, the third area that often we fall into worshiping the God of entertainment is in the area of wonder-inclusive entertainment. Wonder-inclusive. Are you amazed by the fact that with all that we have, technology-wise and resources-wise, that the average person spends a lot of their day thinking, I'm bored? I'm bored. The word bored is actually a newer word. I don't know if you know this or not. I was reading up on the background of the expression, I'm bored. And there was a writer named Winifred Gallagher who believes that boredom is largely a recent problem, absent from many other cultures. And she describes in her article a Western scholar who had lived among the Bushmen of Africa for years and had become fluent in their language. He had tried over the years to come up with an equivalent to the word boredom in their language, but there is a disconnect. This culture simply does not understand the concept. The closest he could come up with that would be equal was they were tired. The word bored actually came during the Industrial Revolution. Isn't that interesting that parallels all the technology and advancement, so-called, that we have? And so it is our boredom, it is our desire for a new wonder that causes us to worship the God of entertainment. All right, let me give you a couple things underneath of that to consider that we need to abandon in order to stop worshiping wonder-inclusive kind of entertainment. Number one, abandon the novelty of wonder. And you see that in verse number 8, this new things. Notice he says, I gathered silver and gold and peculiar, there's the word peculiar treasure of kings and of provinces. And so we see this pursuit of novelty. A few months ago, there was on the Discovery Channel a program. They'd been pushing this. Do you remember this? Michael Phelps, who is the Olympic swimmer, was going to race against a great white shark. Do you remember that? It was on the news a few months ago. And then it ended up, he just, like I'm visualizing, he's going to race a shark. Maybe they'll have a net between or something, but they had these two lanes. And it was a computer-generated image and stats and data to generate how fast a great white would, and then Michael Phelps just jumped in water and swam, and it didn't live up to the hype. But everybody, man, Michael Phelps is going to race a real shark. Isn't it funny how that's always been our human condition? Just something new. Here's a new angle. I was talking last week about, what was it? Some kind of caramel, some salted Pepsi. Just some new flavor, some new we're always looking for something new. And my concern is that reveals something deeper within that is serious and of note and should give us some caution. And here we have Solomon, who is finding peculiar things, new things, specifically, first of all, unique things. Probably most of these treasures referenced here were taxes and art objects and things that were brought into his treasury as taxes to those kingdoms that would have been subservient. I find it striking that Solomon is disregarding his own advice back in Proverbs 3 and verse 14, where he says that wisdom is more gained than fine treasure, fine silver and gold. Are we always after the unique things, the new things, the novel things, not realizing we're abandoning our worship of God? Notice also he says at the end of verse 8, not only unique things, but notice it says, and that of all sorts. Not only do we look for novelty and unique things, but also variety. Variety, all types. Any of you familiar with the term a variety show? That's not used as much nowadays. But a variety show typically would feature a lot of different vignettes or dramatic presentations and then song and dance and other things. And it was the one that comes to my mind is Lawrence Welk show. I don't know if you're familiar with that or not. I remember when our kids were younger, PBS would always run that, I think, on Saturday nights. And my youngest son, who's a bit rhythmic, all right, we'll just leave it at that, he would just, that show would come on and he would start moving with the show. And in the Lawrence Welk show, just that just entertained him to no end. Variety shows. We long for just something different, something new, something else besides the usual fare. And Solomon had at his disposal every sort of musician featured in his court to meet his aesthetic needs. He had a large harem of wives, 1,000 wives that met his physical needs, and he had everything he wanted, every sort was a part of his existence. Yet because of that, this worship of a false god moved his heart away from worshiping the one true God. Jude in verse 7 says, even Sodom and Gomorrah and the cities about them in like manner, giving themselves over to fornication, we'll study on that next week, and going after strange flesh. Have you ever seen a man leave a beautiful wife to marry or to cheat or to run off with another woman that just objectively the wife he's leaving is more aesthetically beautiful than the woman he's leaving? It's how man often views things. You know why that happens? Because men love strange flesh. It doesn't matter if it's better, it's just different. And all of you have those things. It's not that what maybe is out there is better, it's just different. It's something new, and it intrigues us and draws us away from worshiping the one true God. And while most of us chase mirages of supposed pleasure that we'll never be able to afford to get, Solomon reached every one of them, and when he got to the mirage, there was nothing there that brought pleasure, lasting, enduring pleasure. And we would do well to heed his assessment of pursuing all these unique things, pursuing all of these varied things, only to come up empty. Do you remember in Acts chapter 17 where Paul is on Mars Hill? In fact, let's turn there quickly. I think we have time. Acts 17, let's go there. And I want to show you that our innate desire for something new or novel actually exposes our desire for God. Acts 17, and if you would please, verse 21. Acts 17, and if you would please, verse 21. Paul's in Athens, and he walks through the city, and his heart is stirred by all the idolatry, more in your face than the idolatry of our day. But the context is the same. And you notice in verse 21 that Paul says this, notice it, for all the Athenians and strangers which were there spent their time in nothing else but either to tell or to hear some new thing, something novel. Verse 22, then Paul stood in the midst of Mars Hill and said, you men of Athens, I perceive that in all things ye are too superstitious. For as I passed by and beheld your devotions, I found an altar with this inscription, to the unknown God, whom therefore ye ignorantly worship, him declare I unto you. And may I say today, the proneness of people to go after some new thing tells us we still haven't found the true thing, the satisfying thing. We always got to have something new. One of the things that's been humorous to me is I joke about the Lawrence Welk show. Have you watched that recently and laughed at what they wore and their technologically advancements back in the day of backdrops and little segues with the cameras and things, and it looks so just dated, doesn't it? Against the backdrop of eternity, everything, listen to me, teenagers and adults, everything today that you think is so amazing and new is going to feel even worse and more outdated than the Lawrence Welk show this morning against the backdrop of eternity. The things that you think are so amazing and cutting edge right now. Again, all that God has planned for us will be coming up way short. Wonderful new things always become outdated old things. Don't pursue those things. Pursue God. Worship him. Follow him. Make him your first priority. All right, lastly, if you will, go back to our text in Ecclesiastes and look at the last couple of verses here, verse number 9. All right, and there's a second area in which wonder, just wanting to see something wonderful, something amazing in this area of entertainment that we must abandon. Verse 9. So I was great and increased more than all that were before me in Jerusalem. Also my wisdom remained with me. Notice verse 10. And whatsoever mine eyes desired, I kept not from them. All right, some of us, that was our Thanksgiving, okay, and we're still regretting that. And the verse, for my heart rejoiced in all my labor, and this was my portion of all my labor. Jot down, secondly, we need to abandon not only the intrigue or the novelty of wonder, but number two, abandon the recklessness of wonder. The recklessness of wonder. One of the things I've been tracking, and I'm sure you have as well if you have children or grandchildren, is Hollywood imploding. The things that for years and decades have been virtual and just kind of hypothetical and yet very immoral and dysfunctional portrayals in film or on the small screen, that many of those in charge of that industry have been doing those very things behind closed doors. Immoral things, illegal things, illicit things. And can I just say today that when you open up to just letting anything in, it will not be content with what space you give it. It will take over. The toehold becomes a foothold. The foothold becomes the upper hand in every area of our lives. And often we pursue wonder in a reckless fashion. I want to feel this. I want to see this. I want to sense this, not realizing how reckless and careless we are being. And what I find striking is Solomon thinks he's being smart. Do you see that still in verse number 9? I was great and increased more than all before me. Also my wisdom remained with me. Now can I counter that with Solomon's own words? Go to Proverbs. Just go back a book to Proverbs chapter 7 and verse 24. The idea that I can go toward wonder and keep finding something new and intriguing in it, it's not foolish. It's actually a smart move. It's actually something I can pull back at any point. I can quit at any time. I can reverse the downward trend that I'm on. Proverbs 7, if you will, look at verse 24. And as I mentioned, we're going to talk about the god of fornication next week, but this is just a little preview of that in connection with Solomon thinking I'm being wise while being reckless in pursuing wonder. Proverbs 7, if you would please, verse 24. Hearken unto me now, therefore, O you children, and attend to the words of my mouth. Or he's positioning himself as the father, as the one who is teaching Rehoboam and those who will follow. Let not thine heart decline to her ways, go not astray in her paths. For she hath cast down many wounded, yea, many strong men have been slain by her. Her house is the way to hell, going down to the chambers of death. And one of the things that I have found to be true in my life and in others that I counsel and influence and minister, it's very hard to reverse a sinful trend, isn't it? I'm just going to dabble in this. I'm just going to flirt with this. I'm just going to quickly pause for a moment as I click through this, and we allow the entertainment of wonder to make us reckless with what ultimately could cost us our soul. The word amusement, I was reading recently, actually comes from the world of worship. Amusement has as its root the word muse. The muses were female Greek gods who were said to inspire great writing, science, and artistic achievement. They were gods of reflection. And when you add the prefix amuse, it means this: what entertainment and amusement is trying to do is cause us to have a lack of inspiration and a lack of reflection. That's what entertainment is trying to just lull us to sleep. Don't think, don't reflect, don't have anything in your life that can resist my influence. And I think the reason we often seek amusement, I know for me at least, because I do hopefully some of this, I just don't want to think. Do you have that? I just want to veg. I just want to decompress. And can I say this? I don't know how else to say this gently. When we're not thinking, we cannot worship God. When we're not thinking, we cannot worship God. We don't worship God with our emotions. We worship God with what we know of Him. We worship God with what we believe in Him, which always is built on His truth. It's about our mind. It's a battle for the mind. It's a battle for the worship that only can come when your heart is engaged in your relationship with the Lord. And so Solomon realized this, I think, as he went on, the fact that it was reckless and of no use, it was futile. And I would give you just a quick illustration of that. Have you ever had, as he says in verse 10, go back to our text there in Ecclesiastes chapter 2, he gets to the end of that, and he says, then I looked at all that I had, and I had labored to do, and behold, all was vanity and vexation of spirit. Have you ever been flipping through the channels, or you've heard your kids do it, or you've been looking at something, and you say, there's nothing on. There's just nothing. There's nothing left I haven't seen. That's where wonder pursuit leads you. Eventually, there's nothing left, is there? Some of you more seasoned than I, you know that. It's the same thing. You get there, and it's the same thing promised at the last whatever mirage that was offered. And so Solomon realized after all of this that it only led to vanity. Solomon fashioned his own Edenic garden and said there was no forbidden fruit. And the result of that was emptiness. By the way, instead of inspiring our bored, apathetic existence, the God of entertainment actually makes us more bored. It makes us more empty. Don't buy the lie. Don't buy the bait and switch that he offers to you. All right, let me give you a couple of questions as we're doing here on this Sunday morning series. These would be questions that I hope will clear out the temple of your heart where this God of entertainment maybe has crept in. Can I give you a couple of questions? If you're taking notes, I would jot these down. Number one, how good is the quality of your favorite forms of entertainment? How good is the quality of your favorite forms of entertainment? And by that I mean this. Is it just junk food? It's of no value? How good? Or is it meaningful? Is it enriching what you're reading, what you're watching, what you're listening to? How good is the quality of your favorite forms of entertainment? Now, you don't have to listen to Bach all day, and you don't have to, watch reruns of, Julius Caesar to be where you should be in this area. But you ought to have some things in your life that are quality, things that enrich you, not just mind-numbing junk food that fills the void. All right, number two, jot this down. What kinds of entertainment media do you find most addictive? What kinds of entertainment media have you found most addictive? Which ones are you prone to be drawn in? Some have no appeal to me, and probably some of them don't to you as well. But there's one or two or more that you can feel that as soon as you open up to it, it just draws you in. Takes more of your time than it should, takes more of your focus. What kinds of entertainment media have you found most addictive? All right, and then the last one, number three. This would be kind of the gotcha question. Which media would you struggle to live without if marooned on a desert island? Which one could you not live without is kind of the essence of that question. Which media, which form of entertainment would you say, I really have a hard time functioning without that? That should be of concern. We should be able to live and breathe, have our being in God alone. He should be the source of our existence. All right, now, as we finish today, I'd like you to look back at our text, and we're going to take just a little bit of a journey here in our conclusion. But look, if you will, at verse number 11, a little phrase found here that I believe is of great importance. Look at verse number 11, the very end of the verse. So he says this, I have labored, I've wrought, I've done all of these things. It's all vanity and vexation of spirit. Notice the last phrase, and there was no profit under the sun. No profit under the sun. Now, before I come back to that phrase in just a moment, I wanted to show you a picture that my boys and I on Friday, so this would be Black Friday while all of you crazy people are out shopping, my boys and I decided to, and one of our previous neighbor kids that they're friends with, we went to the Hall of Fame in Canton. They had a kids get in for free day, and they gave them some different NFL trinkets and things. And while we were there, they have, and I've been there, this is my second or third time there, they have this one space where it is the Lombardi trophy for the next year. So this would be Super Bowl 52 is this next year. This is the trophy that will have engraved on it the winning team, and they will receive that next year, early in the next year. And it's sitting there ready for the next winter. And what's crazy to me, in that picture, it looks bigger than it is. It really is not, it's a pretty simple trophy. And every time I've been in these settings, a Hall of Fame or somewhere that's so, man, you got to go to this place, and especially the Hall of Fame here in Canton, maybe because it's closer to home. But every time I walk in, I see more and more the props to try to prop up the NFL, the pro football players, and they have the walls with the bust of the enshrinees, and and what's interesting was as I walked through, how many of the guys who is that? These are guys in the Football Hall of Fame, and I maybe I'm younger and don't know who the guy is or never watched that man play. But the men that are there, they didn't seem as big and shiny and impressive as maybe they did when I was a kid. And can I just say today, a lot of the fame, a lot of the props that this world has, I think again, against eternity will seem so small and insignificant. And I think Solomon realized that here in the text. Now here's the issue. Here in that verse where he says there was no profit under the sun. You may want to jot this down and then go through Ecclesiastes and chronicle them. 29 times Solomon said that, under the sun. You know the despair of Ecclesiastes is because Solomon's focus was upon the wrong God. Now, before you criticize Solomon, this guy had it going on, okay? He had the most amazing kingdom. The world came to him for his wisdom. Who of us would not have been puffed up and a bit proud about all that he had done? And yet in the midst of that, his focus was downward. His focus was upon that which was under the sun. And here's what I'm concerned about. I see a lot of Christians in this room. You're trusting God with your soul, but every other aspect of your life is defined by what's under the sun. That's worshiping a false God, a God who's a threat to the God who made that sun, a God who's above that sun, a God who will outlast that sun. And so our worship must be vertically focused. Now, go to the end of Ecclesiastes, and I think Solomon righted the ship a bit, though he still, I believe, to the end of his life, held on to his wives and his false worship, and much in his life I'm sure he regrets today. But look here in the end of Ecclesiastes, he regroups a bit, and notice what he says in verse 13 and 14. And this would be the move that you and I must make if we're to abandon the God of entertainment and pleasure and allow God to be the source of our worship. Verse 13, let us hear the conclusion of the whole matter. All right, all that I've chronicled, here's the last journal entry by Solomon. Let us hear the conclusion of the whole matter. Fear God, keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. For God shall bring every work into judgment with every secret thing, whether it be good or whether it be evil. We are made for God. And until he is the source of our entertainment and our pleasure, we will never achieve the heights of what he has created us to be, who he has created us to be. If you were to ask me today, Pastor, how do we kick the entertainment idols off the heart's throne that are occupying it right now? The simplest analogy I can use is just unplug them. Just unplug the things, the sources, the things that distract you from worshiping God. There are folks in the room that claim you don't have time to read the Bible, you don't have time to pray, and yet you know the other things that occupy the lion's share of your time, that just a little bit of time taken from that could be given to God, could be sacred and holy and worshipful toward the God who deserves all of our time in worship. I was reading the other day of a pastor who was in Haiti, and we had this impression even when we were in Mexico just a few months ago, of the difference between the attention span of a international church member as opposed to we Americans, who already you're thinking, I'm sure you're keeping track of me this morning, how much time I have left. I've got at least an hour, I think, by my count up here. But anyway, and just observing how their sense of time is so much more loose and gracious maybe than we Americans. But this pastor was talking to the native pastor, the local Haitian pastor there, about the time differences. Ours are so short and theirs are so long. And the pastor said, what is it about the Haitian people that keeps them worshiping at church for so many hours? And the pastor was looking for some profound answer. The Haitian pastor just laughed and said, in Haiti, we have nothing else to do. The pastor laughed for a moment, thought, and realized they don't have televisions, radios, internet, phones, theaters. The Lord doesn't have much competition. And here's my concern with the American church. Here it is. God has a lot of competition, doesn't he? Let's be perfectly honest this morning. There are a lot of things that right now God's competing with, things that are just a few minutes from you and your schedule and things you're going to do later tonight. And I think often it's because of those competitive voices and amusements and entertainments that we don't realize how much we've lost our worship of God. Here's my question to you. I dare you with this question. What if you went Haitian? What if you went Haitian just for a day? But what if you acted like you didn't have access to the things that you constantly access at the expense of your worship? What if you just went Haitian for a day? What if your family did? What could that do? What portals could that open of praise and worship? Instead of squeezing Thanksgiving in during the 12-minute lunch break, that became the epicenter, that became the core of your relationship and fellowship with God, that it's what defined you. It's what entertained you. It's what gave you joy. It's what gave you peace. Can I challenge you to eliminate God's competition? Just test it. Just see what it does. And see if God might enhance your worship of him. Here's the question, and we're done this morning. Will you unplug wine-induced entertainment, work-inspired entertainment, and wonder-inclusive entertainment to worship the one true God? Let's pray together. Father, thank you for your word today. Lord, every person in this room has a choice, and I cannot make it for them, and they cannot make it for me. Lord, that is a choice of where we go, where we turn to smile, where we turn to feel.